particular session will be focused on access to talent from an immigration and employment point of view. My name is Elena. I'm a partner in our immigration department. And with me is Birtwistle, a partner in our employment team. I have been asked to start with a few housekeeping points while we have other people join us. And so, first of all, our focus at FAR, as many of you may know, is very much on private and family businesses, on entrepreneurs and investors. This week is therefore a very important part of our entire year. Feel free to have a look at the website I'm about to put on our chat for everyone to see. That will explain much more about how we work and the type of work we do with entrepreneurs and investors throughout the year. With that in mind, I think I will pass on to Anna to start our session.
Thank you, Elena. So I'm going to start, I think, by introducing the concept of the war for talent. And maybe it's a concept that doesn't actually need much introduction, because as many of you may know, it's a concept that was coined in 1997, so over 20 years ago. So the phrase itself isn't new. It formed the title of a book by some authors from McKinsey. And in that book, the war on talent predicted that the make or break for firms over the next 2 decades would be their ability to attract, develop, and retain talent. And you'll see I have taken an extract from that book at the top of this slide. And all of this holds true now. So they say, McKinsey 20 years ago, that the 3 fundamental forces fueling the war for talent are: 1, the irreversible shift from the industrial age to the IT age. Well, that's certainly true. The intensifying demand for high caliber managerial talent, again, true. As well as the growing propensity for individuals to switch roles. Now, on that level, I would say that the millennial workforce is never more than now providing employers with challenges in that regard. But fast forward 20 years to where we are now, what's changed? Well, I think the biggest additional challenge we have, of course, is globalization. And what we're going to be focusing on today is how, in this global world and this global race for challenge, the UK stacks up as a result of Brexit and a result of the global pandemic that we're facing. So if we can just switch on to the next slide. So where does the UK sit now in terms of this global war? Well, according to the global forecasting group Oxford Economics, and it's from a report that I've taken this slide, there is an analysis of the global supply and demand for talent. And what this slide shows, and this figure in particular, is that the UK actually fares pretty close to the bottom in terms of having a severe deficit and challenges in terms of attracting talent. So things aren't looking too good is where I'd start off. Moving to the next slide, please, Alice. Now, being a glass half full kind of a person, and certainly speaking to you today as entrepreneurs, I think that I'm in good company. I'd rather not dwell too much on that last slide. And instead, as the title of this session today gives away, we don't want to focus only on what threats Brexit and COVID pose for accessing talent. And we'll come on to discuss, both Elena and I, that we see opportunities from an HR perspective, from an immigration perspective, arising out of Brexit and COVID and the UK's ability to attract and access global talent. Now, of course, there's no denying that there are threats to talent acquisition. In my mind, the greatest threat caused by Brexit is the uncertainty for businesses that has loomed over us for now, can you believe it, 4 years since the referendum vote. That uncertainty for business has only been compounded by the unprecedented times that we've found ourselves in facing a global pandemic. But just turning back to Brexit then. So since the referendum vote, we've of course lost 2 prime ministers. We've twice had to extend our exit date. And while of course we did exit at the beginning of this year, we've remained for the time being until the 31st of December in a transitional period. And during this transitional period, we are still bound by the single market and customs rules. And it is still the case that we have reached no deal with the EU. Now, the recent events concerning the internal market bill, which would look to override key elements of the withdrawal agreement that's been signed and which would represent us breaking international law, has meant that a no-deal Brexit remains a distinct possibility. Now, we'll come back to talk a little while later about Brexit and employment law impacts, but what I want to just touch on now is the fact of the uncertainty of Brexit and what that means in terms of threats and opportunities in the context of talent acquisition. So the threat side of things, I think, is quite simple. When there's financial instability, where businesses are potentially looking at what the future brings and there's economic uncertainty, what we have seen is that there is often a freeze in hiring, and that is, of course, understandable. Added to that, you have the uncertainty for individuals. So not only are businesses looking and pausing or pressing the pause button on hiring decisions, but equally, individuals are becoming more cautious about jumping ship and taking the risk to change jobs. Particularly for candidates who might be considering making a move to the UK to join a UK employer, the uncertainty of Brexit and the way that we handle COVID and the unemployment fallout from it will no doubt give further pause to individuals that are thinking about making that kind of move. All of that, of course, sounds very pessimistic, and I said that I would be optimistic today. So what are the opportunities posed by this uncertainty in the context of the access for talent? What many businesses have found is that actually COVID in particular has provided the opportunity to take stock of businesses, to reevaluate the USP of a business, to reevaluate the culture and the working culture that exists as part of a broader business strategy. And we're going to come back to the question of strategy and talent acquisition a little bit later. Now, what previous recessions have taught us is that businesses that continue to invest in people and that make good hiring decisions during a recession are actually much better positioned later on and have the right talent to successfully come out of recession. And with large-scale redundancies taking place, and obviously that is terrible news for the country, there is on the flip side the opportunity, without question, that there are businesses, those that can afford to do so, who are taking advantage of the influx of individuals into the workplace. What this is allowing them to do is to potentially hire people that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to hire. Now, of course, going on a hiring spree without careful analysis isn't sensible, but it's certainly the case that there may be talent available to you that wouldn't previously have been available. And that brings with it an opportunity. The second key overlapping impact, I think, of Brexit and COVID and how that will impact talent access arises out of the undeniable change in migration patterns that's already taken place and that will, of course, continue to take place. And Elena will talk more about that. With the end of free movement, the makeup of the employee population in the UK is undeniably going to change in terms of the nationalities coming in and staying in the UK. Of course, EU candidates won't be able to stay with the same ease that they could do previously to work. And migration patterns are further impacted by COVID. As has been widely discussed, individuals are recalculating what they want from work. They're thinking about their families, what work and life means, their wish to travel during or as a result of the pandemic. So we have a situation then where we already had a talent shortage in the UK. We were already competing in a highly competitive global talent pool, and the potential that that's been reduced in size by Brexit and COVID. So what possibly can I be talking about in terms of opportunity? Well, there is a really key one here, and it's one that arises out of COVID, and that's remote working. Of course, the ability to work remotely isn't a new one. Technology has allowed us to do that for some time now, but it has to be said that that's been taken up by a minority of businesses and really in an exceptional number of certain industries. What COVID's done, of course, is that it's forced us all into a worldwide trial of remote working. And what businesses and individuals alike have found that generally it seems to be working. Well, what does that mean? Well, the reality is that where you talk about the threats to the global talent pool, remote working potentially means that you have the opportunity to make use of the global talent pool, even where employees may not, in fact, be located in the UK. Now, aside from the impact of your ability to hire globally and bring people into the UK, remote working also fundamentally shifts where UK employees need to be based. So you're cutting out the need for employees to be based potentially in the city full time. And it means that you might be more willing to hire someone from the Shetlands or from Land's End than would have otherwise even been considered. This may reverse the trend in the deficit of supply and demand that resulted in salary increases occurring regularly. It may in fact result in the end of the disparity between city wages and rural location wages. As a city lover, I'll leave to one side the potential negative impact that this will have on our city and focus on the positives. And that's to say that remote working may bring greater diversity of talent. It may also level the playing field in the UK when it comes to employment opportunities. We'll come back to talk about the legal issues related to remote working in a little while. So finally then, as I pass on to Elena, I want to make one other point. And that is that while freedom of movement for EU workers unquestionably does pose a threat in terms of the ease with which EU workers can be acquired, what Brexit may have done in terms of giving us an opportunity was that whilst it ended free movement, actually it potentially simplified, as Elena will explain, the overall immigration system. And that may provide an opportunity. But let me pass on to Elena to talk about that further.
Thank you, Anna, for that. First of all, a brief overview of where we are in the UK. So, as Anna mentioned, EU, we are looking at the end of free movement rights from the 1st of January 2021. We will have a new immigration system in the UK, whereby European nationals and their family members will be treated equal to people from outside of Europe. So all foreign nationals, anyone who's not a UK national will be treated the same, with some exceptions, and I will come back to those. So if you're looking at bringing staff from Europe, there is a strong case to try and bring them into the UK before January. But as I said, I'll come back to that. The people most impacted by this are workers, students, employers, and of course, entrepreneurs who are looking at establishing businesses here and rely on workforce which they can easily access. However, the good news is that the UK very much remains open for business. That's the government's policy, that's their line. And we immigration practitioners were very pleasantly surprised to see that it was reflected in several points. First of all, the new immigration system, which the UK will have in place from the 1st of January, is much more flexible than the system we currently have for employers to be able to bring employees to the UK. And I will expand on that in a little while. Further, we had quite a few non-work related categories which are introduced into our system. Again, people who are in the UK and have visas which aren't necessarily work visas, but which allows them, which give them the right to work, are something that employers are frequently of interest, because effectively all the visa arrangements are then on the employee, and they come to the UK willing to work, willing and able to work without the employer having to jump through the hoops of sponsoring an employee. Also, and that's in part to do with COVID-19, processes and procedures have already started being simplified. So, for example, as some of you may know, a part of a visa application process is for applicants to submit their biometrics, which means that they need to attend visa application centers in person to give fingerprints, have their photograph taken, etc., etc. This was in the process of being simplified, but COVID-19 has very much been a catalyst that expedited the process. And so at the moment, the Home Office has a new application which enables applicants to effectively submit their biometrics online without having to attend centers. And also the Home Office has been quite generous with various COVID-19 concessions for employers and students in particular, overall, but in particular employers and students. And so we have seen businesses who benefited from being able to recruit employees and have them start working for them much quicker, for example, before their visa even decided in some cases. Moving on to the next slide. So some practical considerations when looking at employees who need visa or workers who need visa. There are usually, in my experience, several options available. It's just a question of taking a step back and looking at the whole picture, and then choosing a strategic approach. And so what I usually start with is I ask whether the worker in question is a European national or whether he is the family member of a European national, even if that person themselves are not European, because that opens up and will continue to open up, as I will explain, easier entry routes to the UK. If the worker in question is not a European national, then the question is, does he have the right to a visa independently of work? And so I have just come off a call 20 minutes ago with a young lady who wants to apply for a spouse visa on the basis of her being married to a British national, which will enable her to work. Her employer said that they will happily pay for that visa because although they will incur some expense, they will not have to sponsor her anymore, which is a much bigger investment in terms of finances and resources. So that's also something worth bearing in mind. If the visa is linked to employment, then consider the duration of employment and the type of work to be performed. Often we see situations where workers, well, they're not employees then, but workers can come to the UK to undertake certain tasks as visitors, although they cannot be paid in the UK when they do that. That still often is a very good solution for clients in various situations. And so just bear that in mind. Additionally, bear in mind that most visa routes, most residence visa routes, lead to permanent residence in the UK, usually after 5 years. The importance of this is even if you have a worker who requires visa solutions, chances are after 5 years in the UK, and provided they meet all other requirements, they will have permanent residence, which means it is effectively an indefinite status which allows them to work, which means that the employer can step away from dealing with the visa situation for whichever worker they want to bring. And coincidentally, they can also apply for British citizenship, typically after 6 years. Moving on to the next slide and looking a little bit more deeply into the situation around European national. And so the key distinction is the 1st of January 2021. That's the key date. European nationals who arrive in the UK before the 31st of December 2020 will be able to continue to exercise rights of free movement. However, it is important those people keep evidence of the fact the right in the UK was, the right of residence in the UK was triggered before 31st of December. That's quite easily done. I won't go into the detail now. If anyone needs more information, let me know. But the absolute best evidence is by ensuring that the employee or worker in question applies for a status in the UK to reflect that. And so if a European national is in the UK for more than 5 years, then they can apply for settled status, which is effectively permanent residence. And if someone arrives in the UK, let's say on the 28th of December, they can apply for pre-settled status. Pre-settled status is effectively a 5-year temporary resident document, which allows the employee to continue working in the UK or to start working in the UK. And so my advice to clients is often to consider the recruitment strategy And if they are looking at potentially bringing employees into the UK at the start of 2021, then they really should look at whether they can move that forward a little bit and benefit from a very easy immigration system and with not having the need to sponsor more employees going forward. However, even under the new immigration system, European nationals will be able to come for short trips and visits. And so again, anyone who comes into the UK from 1st of January 2021 will either have to meet the requirements of the new system, which effectively will be sponsorship, or they will be able to come for trips. And then you just need to consider the point I made on the previous slide, which is, will they be performing certain activities for a fairly short period of time, which means they're fine to come here as a visitor and you don't need to consider sponsoring them. Moving on to the next slide. And so now we're looking at non-European people or European people in the post 1st January 2021 system. The first one I wanted to look at is work visa in the form of sponsorship. The premise is that UK businesses may sponsor foreign worker once they have sponsor license. And sponsor license is a license they obtain from the UK government. This applies to existing businesses, but also to startups. So we often work with people who come to us, entrepreneurs who come to us and say, look, I want to establish this business, but I have got to have this, for example, accountant, because it's a very specific area and I will be working with a very specific jurisdiction. That accountant has experience, and so I can't start my business properly without having this accountant here. And that's a fairly recent client case we had. And that's absolutely fine. So what we're doing for that client now is, together with our corporate team and with our employment team, we're setting up the company, drawing up contracts, applying for a sponsor license, and then bringing the employee into the UK. What's important is that the sponsorship system is designated for skilled workers. Now, at the moment, they're looking at the equivalent of level degree, experience, skills, and above. However, from 1st of January 2021, that requirement will be reduced. And that's one of the reasons Anna referred earlier to a simplified immigration system. And so the UK will now have more ability to bring in lower skilled people than before under the sponsorship system. Importantly, employers will have certain duties and responsibilities, and the Home Office very much monitors that compliance duty. It's on an ad hoc basis, it's not perpetual. And I should say, we see many clients who come to us and say, oh God, we're really worried, it's a shared system with the Home Office, we don't want to be scrutinized at all times. It's not really that draconian, it's quite basic, I would say, once broken down properly. And it really is about making sure that employers help in preventing illegal working and illegal migration. And we regularly help clients with putting systems in place. Once those systems are up and running, it's a fairly straightforward administrative task and monitoring. Moving on to non-sponsorship related work. Just to give you a couple of examples, and that might apply to entrepreneurs more, although we do see employers bringing employees using these categories as well. So sole representative of an overseas company, that works very well for people who are senior employees in an overseas business and who want to come to the UK, or whose employer want them to come to the UK to establish the first office, the first kind of entity in the UK, branch or subsidiary. The key point here is that there cannot be de facto control of the overseas entity by the person wanting to come to the UK. And so to give you an example, we have recently worked with a serial entrepreneur who established, his pattern was to establish businesses and then slowly hand over shares. And so he was a minority shareholder in a certain business, but he also worked as a director. and he wanted to look at establishing a subsidiary in the UK for that business. He was able to do so. And so again, we will be working actually specifically with Anna on putting his contract in place, and we have consulted our corporate team as well to make sure that the structuring of the business is done properly, not only from an immigration perspective, but also taking into account all of his worldwide business interests. Also worked on this with our corporate tax team, which was a very interesting experience for me. Another visa route is global talent, and that is divided into established leaders in their fields and global promise, which is people who are just starting their career but who have the potential to become leaders in their field. The key point to bear in mind here is that it's a two-stage application process. First of all, that person has to be endorsed by an endorsing body, and I have listed the fields on this slide. I can give you more information if you have any specific questions about the types of endorsing bodies. I should say this is not my favorite route, simply because it's not very user-friendly. Extension applications, once an initial visa period expires under this route, is quite difficult and challenging. My personal view is that the Home Office will probably be making changes to this route because they're receiving multiple complaints about it. I should also point out before we move to the next slide that we used to have something called the entrepreneur category, and I still have many calls and queries about that. That category has sadly been closed in March 2019, but I have to say we haven't really had to turn away clients. We were always able to find different solutions for them. So slightly more creative and needing to be a little bit more pragmatic about things. Next slide is just so that you know upcoming routes. So routes which are not yet in operation, but which will be coming in to force quite soon. Highly skilled visa, that will be quite an exceptional route for people at the very, very top of the game. We don't have much information about this route just yet, but we're told that not many people will be able to meet the requirements. The advantage of this route is that no job offer will be needed for those people to come to the UK. Rollout date, we don't have details, sometime in 2021. However, if someone is that high skilled, you will be able to bring them under the sponsorship system in any event. The next one, that's quite an interesting one, is the graduate visa route. Now, that one is aimed at international students, and of course there will be many more international students after January 2021, because European students will be regarded as international students as well. And so really it's an opportunity to integrate those students into the UK workforce after they finish their studies. The rollout date for this is summer 2021. The advantage for people who want to employ those students is that they will be able to have them working for them without having to sponsor them and without the employer really investing anything in the visa situation as such for this particular person. And then it's quite an easy lead-in to sponsorship should the employer want to sponsor that student after 2 years. The last one is BNO visa, and that's a very specific category, but you should be aware of that because we have had quite a few inquiries about that. It's for Hong Kong nationals who have a specific British national overseas passport. Maybe they don't have it now, but who are entitled to have it, and they will know. Those who are entitled usually know. Effectively, it will enable visa holders to live and work in the UK, not sponsored again, and simply on the basis of holding that passport. This category will start in January 2021, but important to know that in some circumstances, you will be able to employ BNO visa holders even before January. But I would encourage you to take advice on that. Moving on to the next slide, please. Just some final thoughts. So always bear in mind, usually there is more than one option available. It is really rare for me to turn around and say to a client that I can't think of any way to bring an employee or them into the UK. We always consider business needs and take a strategic approach. So it's very common for us to work with other departments because we don't really want to reach a position where we deliver on the visa front, but then the business has difficulties on others. And that I think is quite an important thing to bear in mind. Right to work checks, that's the big final point in terms of the technical stuff I'm discussing today. And so every business, whether you sponsor employees or not, really should run right to work checks. It's a very basic compliance practice for all new employees, all UK nationals and non-UK nationals. And it effectively consists of making sure the documents look authentic and taking a copy, certifying it in a specific way. Now, it's not an offense or a breach not to do those right to work checks if there are no problems. However, we had quite a few employers who came to us with penalty notices from the UK government because their employees, for example, turned out to have false documents and right to work checks were never performed, and therefore the employers were exposed. And so I would say, again, it's an administrative step, very much worth taking because it will save you a lot of problems in the future should anything go wrong. And so Brexit and COVID is not all bad news, as you've seen from immigration and from what Anna has said. And I just wanted, Anna, if you're still with us, I can't see you in the window, but if you're still with us, I just wanted to come back to remote working and see whether you had any further thoughts on remote working.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully you can see me now.
Yeah.
Well, look, what can I say about remote working? Since COVID and lockdown, aside from advising on furlough schemes initially, remote working has been the biggest area of advice that we as employment lawyers have been giving. And it's also the biggest change to the working world, I think, that we have all seen. I'll make a few points from a legal point of view. Obviously, we've already talked about the opportunity that remote working provides for us in terms of accessing talent. But maybe thinking about some of the legal issues that you would want to have in mind if you went ahead and, for example, engaged either an employee or a contractor who was based outside of the UK to work for you. I think the first thing that you will want to think about is a really simple one, and that's the governing law of your contract that you put in place. But even if you elect to choose English law, as you may well do if HQ of the business is here, you also need to be mindful that local laws, if the jurisdiction in which the employee is based, whether that's in Europe or further afield, may well be applicable in terms of mandatory employment protections, for example, in relation to health and safety obligations that you may have as the employer, albeit they may differ from the health and safety obligations under UK law. So I think that would be my first word of caution, that you should certainly, if you go ahead with remote, engaging a remote worker overseas, think about taking local law advice. Secondly, I think special thought needs to be given to employees and how things change if an employee isn't based in your office, in terms of just the level of control you exercise over the individual's day-to-day work. So very basic things like confidentiality. Who can hear your employee when he or she is discussing very confidential information about your business? Are there family members also working from the same space? Housemates even. So confidentiality is a big issue, and making sure that you're very clear in terms of the policies that you have in place in relation to confidential information. You'll also have to think about data protection issues, data security, dare I say it, data transfer as well, all of which could form the subject of an entire talk. Again, you need to think about, are your policies adequate in relation to those issues? Is your contract adequate in relation to those issues? And maybe finally, aside from just straight employment law issues, you're going to have clear tax considerations to take into account if your worker is out of the UK for more than 183 days in the tax year. You'll have to think about their social security position and even basic things like what currency are they paid in, who takes the risk on currency fluctuations, is that you as the employer, is that the individual? So there's a lot you can think about in terms of remote working, but as I say, I think for the purpose of this topic today, what we wanted to highlight is the opportunity that remote working brings in terms of access to talent.
From an immigration perspective, just to jump in here, as far as remote working is concerned, that has made life much easier for employers who, for example, can't bring employees to the UK. So, for example, people who just won't move at the moment, for example, because they have families somewhere else, and they don't want to leave them in this climate. And so those people, of course, if someone works for a business without entering the UK, then they don't need a UK visa. So in a way, problem solved, subject to all the other issues Anna raised. And so we've seen quite a few people taking that up. Some of our clients who have done so said to us, look, it's not an ideal solution, it's not a permanent solution, but it's definitely an easier solution, which we may well carry with us. For example, if we need an employee to start very quickly in the future, but that employee doesn't have a visa or his visa process will take a long time. So they will consider remote working now much more than they would have done in the past. So that's one thing that came out of that. And for those of you who are sponsoring employees, and I can see a few of you who I know are, for those of you who are sponsoring employees, just bear in mind that although the Home Office is quite flexible at the moment with remote working arrangements, as you know, if the place of work for your employee changes, then that needs to be reported to the Home Office. However, again, looking at the people present here, I know that we have been speaking to each of you separately in relation to your specific business and employees. So I don't really think any of our clients at least is unaware of that, but that's definitely one to bear in mind. And I think that's it from me on the immigration side of things. Anna, was there anything else that you wanted to bring up today?
Maybe just briefly in terms of Brexit and the impact that Brexit will have on employment law. I'll say a couple of words on that. The extent to which it will impact talent acquisition, to be honest, I'm a little bit skeptical about. I have to say that I'm not sure that aside from if the UK removed its employment protections altogether, that individual talent think about the employment laws that are in place in the country they're going to work in as their driving factor in whether or not they accept a job. But do let me say a few words about Brexit. I suppose the first thing to say is that where we have no deal at the moment, we can't say with any certainty what the impact of Brexit will be on employment law. I think certainly if a trade deal was to be done, then potentially one concession that we in the UK may look to give is that employment law would remain broadly in line with EU worker protections. Of course, where things stand right now following our exit on the 31st of January is that basically all EU law, including employment law, as it existed immediately prior to exit, was effectively copied and pasted into domestic law. So a snapshot of EU law related to employment was taken and it existed the day that we left the EU. The Withdrawal Act did, however, have an immediate impact from the point of exit on the status of the Court of Justice of the European Union, and that is relevant in terms of employment law. And that's important because prior to us exiting, there was the ability for employment cases to be taken up to the European Court of Justice, who were historically known to interpret the law more favourably for workers than the British courts were. So that is one thing that has changed. In addition to which, the courts post-Brexit will be able to enact and introduce new laws that diverge from EU employment laws. But the extent to which, as I said at the beginning, that the government will do this seems unlikely. And I say that for a number of reasons. One, the fact that in reality, many of the EU rights that we have in the employment sphere are basically woven into the moral fabric of society. So I cannot imagine a system in which we will be getting rid of, for example, discrimination protections or holiday rights or family rights. I don't think any government would really want to be seen to be doing away with those. Moreover, many of the employment rights that we have don't have a bearing on whether or not we're in the EU. So actually UK employment law already offered greater protection for workers in some areas than EU law did. So for example, in relation to minimum holiday entitlements, maternity rights, and equally, some of the rights that we have under employment law existed prior to EU law coming into force. So we had laws on equal pay and certain discrimination rights before the EU. And lastly, actually some of our employment rights are purely domestic and have no link to the EU. So take, for example, shared parental leave. So I might stop there and just say, in my view, and it is only my view, I can't see a scenario in which necessarily, at least in the short term, we're going to see a huge change to the employment law landscape as a result of Brexit. I may move now, Alice, to the next slide.
Before you start on the next slide, can I throw a question at you? And it's a question which someone asked in the Q&A, and thank you for that question. So regarding remote working, should UK white-collar workers be careful what they wish for? If they can do their jobs easily at home, is there not a danger that those jobs could easily be done by cheaper workers in other jurisdictions, for example, India?
I'd have to say yes, will be my view. And it's not just cheaper workers where functions could be outsourced to, say, India. Equally outsourced out of the city salary band. So London wages versus actually, well, maybe you go up to Newcastle, maybe go up to Scotland and could pay someone far less for the job that an individual doing it in London would be paid. So I think the answer to that is certainly yes. There is that danger for individuals.
But did you not find, because one of the things we are seeing from speaking to employers is that, yes, this is definitely a consideration, sometimes financial, sometimes otherwise. But what we see from employers is even those who adjusted very well to it, and I have to say even us at Fire & Co, we've adjusted quite well to it, everyone is working from home. But many of us really miss coming into the office and having this interaction. And what we hear from employers quite frequently is that although they're working under the current circumstances, their preference is definitely to be seeing people at work at least several times a week. And I don't know how strongly you see it from kind of your end of the ship.
I think there's a mixed bag. I have, from a personal perspective, been quite surprised about how much remote working has been welcomed, particularly by individuals. I mean, it's a wholesale shift. So yes, certainly there are businesses who are saying, in-person meetings cannot be replaced, particularly sort of creative industries, I think, or industries that really rely on brainstorming and teamwork. I think that it's going to be a while till things level out. I think that we're in something of a honeymoon period to do with remote working. There's obviously huge benefits for businesses. So even if you take, for example, the cost that businesses are spending on office space, that is an immediate short-term gain if you can not be paying high city leases. But I do think that we're going to see over the next, say, 24 months, I think it will take some time, a leveling out, and there'll be a realization of what you do miss in terms of in-person working. And I think that is going to be even clearer for, if we're talking about entrepreneurs, new businesses that haven't had years to embed culture in the workplace. And how do you embed culture remotely if you're a pretty new team and you're looking to acquire people? But you know, on the flip side, people are changing, and the way in which people are connecting is changing through obviously Zoom and Teams and all of these online platforms that we have.
And I guess it's also industry specific. So again, from what we see, if people, clients who deal with IT and etc., they're much more used to doing that, as are translation companies. They're very easy with that. Whereas industry where you have more client contact almost, and where it's based on it, including us, and I know that some of the financial services providers we work with, that works, but I think it only works because many of our clients are aware it's a temporary measure. And in fact, we've been seeing many more requests from clients, for example, to meet in person and start kind of having that interaction a little bit more. So I guess remains to be seen.
Yes, I agree. But look, I am subject to any more comments or questions. I just want to wrap up by looking at what you should be doing if we're talking about this war for talent. What can we be doing in spite of everything we've said about Brexit and COVID to try and access talent, to try and win talent? And I've set this out visually here, but I'm just going to talk through a few of the points, and they're all interlinked really. But I think the starting point that I would like to make is that you should be applying the same rigor and effort into human capital planning as you give generally to overall business strategy. And when you're thinking about where does that strategy actually begin, well, I think the first place is looking at the people, the employees, the contractors, your workforce in place now, and seeing, can you actually invest in them? So effectively, can your strategy be to build them and build your talent as opposed to going out externally to buy talent as a first point? You need to look at your business's talent supply and look at that and consider it in the same way that you're looking at how Brexit and COVID impact your other supply chains. So start by undertaking a skills audit so you accurately understand the capabilities within the team now, and then start looking at skills forecasting and what capabilities and knowledge you're going to require in the post-Brexit, post-COVID world. You know, how might remote working, greater home working change the skills that you require? How might greater digitalization change the people and skills you require? No doubt significant thought is being given by all businesses to the overall brand and USP of the business. But the second thing I'd say is that thought needs to be given to something separate, which is the employer brand, if you've heard of that before. And by the employer brand, what I mean is the company's reputation as a credible employer and as being a great place to work, because it's that's going to separate you in terms of attracting the best talent. So the employer brand is how you market to employees. It's the public perception of your company as an employer. And it also explains to the employee their value proposition. So you need to define the culture of the organization and communicate why you are a good employer. And I think this is ever more important. And if you look at a study from LinkedIn recently, they found that unsurprisingly, 75% of job applicants will consider a potential employer's brand as an employer before they consider applying for a job. And also 50%, and that will only continue to increase, will research the company's website and social media profile. You should also think very carefully about recruitment and selection. Focus on the candidate experience is very important, because when you're going out to acquire talent, of course, you're not going to end up hiring everyone you interview and seek to recruit, but that's the same pool of people from who you're recruiting. So the candidate that you interview, even if they don't move to you, will be talking to other people in the market. We've seen a huge rise during COVID of remote hiring practices, and you just have to bear in mind that these during a remote hire, you need to be just as vigilant in ensuring that you have a number of interviews as you would be if you were doing this all face-to-face. Turning next to just reward generally, just briefly on this, there's obviously the issue of pay. There always is going to be. But actually, what is really interesting coming out of COVID in particular is that studies are finding that it's becoming more and more important to candidates that actually they're looking for something beyond just reward financially. What they're looking for is the potential for their future within the business, the level at which the company is going to invest in them, provide them with proper training. And also think about things like employee well-being, which has obviously been brought to the fore as a result of COVID. Retention is about keeping people obviously engaged. So I won't go further into that given the length of time we have. But obviously employee communication during economically uncertain times has been shown to be even more important than ever. And you can see that during COVID. So advising our clients, you can see the difference between the clients that have communicated well with their employees during these uncertain times, who have far less difficulty from an employment law perspective than those whose comms have perhaps not been up to scratch.
Something that fits into that, and sorry for jumping in, is we have seen the same in terms of the support that businesses offer their employees at the moment, because we have some very, very nervous employees not knowing what to do about their visa, not knowing where they can move. And many of our clients have taken the line of, we want to support our employees as much as we can. And having seen certain clients terminate employment, but saying to employees, we will still support you through your visa process and we will help you to secure your next immigration status. That is something that's been quite strategically used is not a great word, but it's been a strategic asset, I would say, for employers when negotiating end of employment, etc. So yes, that's definitely something we've seen much more.
Interesting. So I'll end maybe on just business protection. Obviously, even with the best retention schemes in place, you're never going to be able to prevent someone leaving your employment. So you will lose talent. And in these competitive times, that is going to happen. So it's thinking about at the outset, so when you make a hire, what you can do contractually from a legal perspective to ensure that if you are to lose talent, it has as minimal an impact as possible on your business. So you're thinking there about things like notice periods. So how long realistically would it take for you to find a replacement if you lost a key person in your team? Do you need garden leave provisions, which would allow you to lock someone out of the market, leave them at home in the garden during their notice period? And what about post-termination restraints? So things like non-compete provisions, preventing your key talent moving to your arch competitor, or non-solicitation provisions that prevent that individual from soliciting your clients or your customers, equally from soliciting your other employees to go and join them in their new venture or with their new employer. The key thing that I would just mention in terms of post-termination restraints is that you need to consider them very carefully at the outset, both in the context of your specific business and in the context of the individual's specific role. And that's because the starting point legally is that a restriction of this kind, so whether you're talking about a non-compete or a non-solicitation type provision, is going to be unenforceable for being a restraint of trade if it goes beyond protecting the legitimate interests of the business. And the legitimate interests of the business, broadly speaking, are its confidential information, its customers and client base, and the stability of its workforce. So if you are looking to put post-termination restraints in place, then you need to think about those really carefully at the outset. And I might just end.
Oh, sorry. Just looking at the clock, and we have 2 minutes, and no one likes to be late on an afternoon. A quick question for both of us, I think, although, and I'll let you answer that first. As lawyers, can you build the same rapport with your clients without the ability to meet them face to face?
I'm meeting people face to face, so we've obviously had loads of new client instructions over the last 5-6 months because, well, being in employment, it's a very busy time. But I miss that. So with all of my new clients, I have said we've got to go and meet for lunch after all this is over and when we can do. So my answer is you can go so far, but it's not the same in my view.
And so for us, it's similar from my own personal perspective. Having said that, we have corporate clients and businesses who are based overseas, and we never really meet in person. So is it doable? Yes, it's doable. Would I prefer to meet them at some point? Absolutely yes. So that's where we are. And so with 1 minute left to spare, thank you everyone for your time. And thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoy the upcoming week. Again, encourage you to join the very last session in particular, because drinks is always good, even though it's in your house and it's your own drinks. But hopefully we'll do it differently next year. And so thank you. And thank you, Anna, for hosting this seminar with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.